Welcome to this event on the role of AI in achieving the SDGs. I'm Anna Fellander. I'm the founder, together with Elaine Weidman-Grunewald, of the AI Sustainability Center. This event is hosted by KTH, the Royal Institute of Technology, AI Sustainability Center, and MIT. So there has been an enormous interest for this event, and we're very grateful to welcome you all. As Ricardo said, we just pushed the record button, and the event will be on YouTube later during the day.
Okay, thank you, Anna, for the introduction. We're very excited to be here, and that so many people got interested in this event. We're going to talk about AI and sustainability, and the discussions today revolve around this recent study that we published earlier this year in Nature Communications, where we have a quite comprehensive analysis of this impact. We will talk about it a lot today. It has gained a lot of interest also, both in academia, industry, policymakers. It has been downloaded over 42,000 times since January, and this really reflects the interest of this topic and how it affects more and more everybody's lives. So I really welcome everybody. We're very excited and very happy that you join us. And we would like to thank our sponsors today, the KTH Sustainability Office, and also the KTH Digitalization Platform, who made this possible, as well as the speakers who kindly agreed to share their points of view on this topic. Back to you, Anna.
Okay, so this event will have two parts, and we will also have, after these two parts, Q&A sessions after the panels. And then you are able to write your questions in the chat of the event, and then the moderator will ask the questions to the speakers. And we will try to answer as many questions as possible, but keep in mind that we only have 15 minutes for each Q&A session. So the agenda for part one, please, yes, is the AI for prosperous world, the SDGs and beyond. And Francesco Fuso Nerini and Ricardo Vinuesa, which are both associated professors at the KTH, Royal Institute of Technology, will be presenting. And after that, Max Tegmark, professor of physics and AI at the Center for Brains, Mind and Machines at MIT, will do a presentation on AI for a prosperous 21st century. And then we will have the panel discussion moderated by myself. The second part of this event will be on equally important subject, that is AI and sustainability in practice. And I'm honored to present that my partner of the founding of the AI Sustainability Center will have a 15 minutes talk on her experience on societal and ethical considerations when applying the SDGs to AI. It will be followed by Manuela Battaglini, the CEO of Transparent Internet, on transparency, automated decision-making processes, and personal profiling. And also, after that, following Dr. Shivam Gupta, PhD in geoinformatics, researcher at the University of Bonn on digitainability. That's a fantastic, innovative verb at the indicator level of SDGs. Then the session will be moderated by Elaine Grunewald, and also by the end of this afternoon for us here in Stockholm, it will be a closing remark by myself and Francesco. So please let me introduce the role of artificial intelligence in achieving the SDGs. Please step on the virtual stage, Francesco and Ricardo.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. Great. May I just check if you see the presentation?
Yes.
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 Thank you. Well, thank you, Anna, for the introduction. As Ricardo and Anna introduced, today we're going to first introduce this article, which was a very interesting study trying to understand how AI might affect the delivery of all SDGs and the targets. So first of all, a bit of background. I think most of you, if hopefully all of you, are very familiar with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. As you know, it has 17 highly interconnected sustainable development goals, which encompass 169 targets to be achieved by 2030. It is a global plan of action for people, planet, and prosperity. So something that you might not all know is that the detail of the 169 targets of the Sustainable Development Goals has been increasingly used to frame and understand and direct research policy and programs. In fact, SDG has shown to be a powerful tool to collect and categorize research, to understand policy needs and direct them, and also for cross-sectorial coordination. So in many countries, decisions are often taken in silos in one or the other sector, with the ministries not always coordinating, depending on where you are in the world. And studies on the interconnectedness of the SDGs really help to coordinate across sectors. Just to flag, this is quite an exciting field of research, which has crucial insights to guide policymaking. There is now an increasing field of research looking at how SDGs interconnect and how to use that knowledge to guide decisions. Here's just some examples looking at climate, looking at energy decisions. But within that stream of research, what we want to focus on today is this article, which was briefly introduced. So is this perspective published at the beginning of this year in Nature Communications, called The Role of Artificial Intelligence in Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So this has been a very well-received article, as Ricardo said, downloaded over 40,000 times. It reached up to 1.5 million people in Twitter, and also it was featured in several international news. In this article was also described as an holistic intersection of the fields of AI and sustainable development, which was very interesting. Basically, the motivation of this study is that we wanted to answer the question if there is published evidence of AI acting as either an enabler or an inhibitor for each one of the 169 targets. So, as you have seen, when we talk about the SDGs, we talk about a lot of fields and a lot of topics. We talk about poverty, we talk about inequalities, but also we talk about physical systems like energy, water, food systems, cities, but also global peace and conflict, and so on. So obviously, when you do studies across all these disciplines, you really need a multidisciplinary team to capture, well, all the nuances that there are across all these goals and targets. And what we did here basically was to try to map expertise to SDGs, to try to capture at least the most important fields to be assessed with this study. Obviously, you can never capture all of it, but I think we did a pretty good job at assembling a team that spans, obviously, knowledge about artificial intelligence, which is crucial, but also knowledge about how AI affects all fields of sustainability. So you can see we have authors from engineering, from natural, for social sciences, but also in very specialized in one of the other aspects. Well, obviously we have Max, which will speak right after us, which is a visionary in AI applications and development. We have experts in AI ethics. We have experts in how AI might affect environmental outcomes and also physical systems. So the first step that we had to do for this study was to really understand and define artificial intelligence. This is a term that you hear a lot around, and it might have different meanings. So the first step was to sit with all the experts and try to define AI. And this is the definition that we came out with. So AI for this study is software technology with either perception, so for instance, ability of face recognition, decision-making capability, so for instance, medical diagnosis, which is something that, of course, is very on top of the agenda now with the COVID-19 crisis, possibility of prediction, such as weather forecast, automatic knowledge extraction and pattern recognition from data. Another very important thing, for instance, or application is using AI to discover and, well, fight fake news circles in social media, interactive communications, such as social robots or chatbots, and logical reasoning. So this is quite a broad definition of AI, which also includes machine learning. Very briefly then on the methods that we use to do this analysis. So the methods have been refined from previous publications in the field, looking at how SDGs are intertwined. And in summary, they can be defined as a consensus-based expert elicitation process for each SDG. To simplify that, basically, here you see an extract from the supplementary material. In the supplementary material, we have all the 169 targets of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And for each of these 169 targets, we did kind of a micro literature review to try to answer the question if for that target there is published evidence of AI acting either as an enabler or an inhibitor for that specific target. So initially, each SDG was assigned to a couple of authors that did the first assignment of the literature, obviously driven by their expert knowledge in that specific SDG. This was then reviewed by another 2 or 3 authors, and then iteratively discussed until a conclusion was reached. And obviously this is, for the single target, is maybe not such a difficult exercise. But what I think is very interesting is then looking transversally at all the targets, at the information that you get of how AI might affect globally this agenda. Yeah, and from that to try to get informations on the future development across different fields. And this is just to flag when we present results, when Ricardo will present results very soon, we have divided the SDGs pragmatically into the quite common category of society, economy, and environment. Here you can see how each SDG is assigned to one or the other. Again, this is a pragmatic division to represent results and categorize it. But of course, it's not, they're not only in one or the other. This is a bit more fluid. So I will leave Ricardo now to go on presenting the results from the study.
Thank you, Francesco, for nicely setting up the stage. As Francesco mentioned, we divided the 17 SDGs into 3 categories, environment, economy, and society. And we assess for each of the 169 targets within those SDGs, whether there was published evidence of a positive or a negative impact of AI on the achievement of that particular target. And our results indicate that there is in principle, more positive impact of AI. 79% of the targets can be enabled by AI technologies, whereas only 35% would have a negative impact or would be inhibited through AI development. What you see now when you split into the 3 categories is that the environment seems to have the highest possible positive impact of AI, whereas perhaps a society with 38% of its targets being negatively affected would be the one with more negative effects from AI. If we go in the next slide to a more detailed assessment, what you see is all the 17 SDGs, and on the right we show in this web chart the actual percentage of targets positively affected by AI, and on the right the percentage of targets negatively affected by AI. So as we showed before, there is in principle a more positive effect of AI. You can see two webs, two lines. The thinner line indicates whether there is some evidence to draw that connection, either positive or negative. And the thicker lines, which are indicating lower values, to obtain those results, we accounted for the strength of the evidence. So if some of those studies or some of those indications were based on less strong evidence, then we had a weighting factor to make them count less, essentially. What is interesting from this figure is that in the case of environment and society, when one takes into account the strength of the evidence, it seems that there is a bigger reduction on the negative impact. In other words, the evidence suggesting positive effects of AI seems to be stronger in the cases of environment and society than in the case of the negative ones. However, maybe a bit unsurprisingly, the opposite happens when it comes to the economy. What you can see in the sector of economy is that the evidence suggesting positive impact of AI is a bit weaker comparatively than the evidence supporting negative effects of AI. Which is then, this is a helpful framework because it shows us areas where certainly there is the need for more research, or at least for more studies that can be generalized in a more robust way. Perhaps one last thing, we should not be deceived by the fact that there is more targets that can be positively affected, because it just takes one target that is critical and that has a negative impact from AI to completely dominate the negative effects and then have possibly catastrophic consequences. So even if the numbers show a more positive effect of AI, we really want to bring up attention to paying more research and developing more research to those negative impacts because of the potential consequences that they may have. What we show here is a more detailed view. You can see the SDGs connected to society, to economy, and to environment. So here we really show the detailed assessment of each of the targets. The green boxes correspond to a positive effect of AI, whereas the orange ones correspond to a case where we found a negative or an inhibiting effect of AI towards the achievement of that target. I'm going to be discussing some examples. Of course, if you are interested in more detail, you can go to the article. You can go to the supplementary material where all the references are very detailed. And now I will just highlight some of the most interesting results that we observed. So perhaps one, starting with the good news, AI can really enable, well, it can help to increase the productivity with positive effects in society and economy through new technologies and through overcoming limitations that currently exist. So in principle, it has the potential to help with industry, with economic growth, and to tackle poverty. However, there is a counterpart to this, and is that AI may also raise the certain barriers to access this technology. So if the future will rely on using AI to power the economy, and then it turns out that one needs higher qualifications and one needs resources and data centers to be able to exploit the benefits of AI, we might end up with increasing inequalities and increases in poverty, and also bigger gaps between the developed and developing countries. So in the end, one has to be quite careful with this dual, double-edged sword effect of AI when it comes to wealth and development. More examples, we also have to highlight, and now we have a very prominent example with the COVID-19 crisis, the polarization that can be induced by AI with clear impacts on SDGs 16 and 17, on strong institutions and partnerships for the goals. Social media biases what you want to see and the kind of information that you access. So this is certainly one challenge to be tackled in the future. AI and the content in social media has influenced elections, and it will continue to have probably negative effects in a wide range of areas. So this is something to really pay quite some attention to. Now, if we move to, well, again, more positive and good news, AI can really help with climate, with energy, and with pollution. In particular, in the context of cities, SDG 11 on smart cities and sustainable cities, AI, we have really seen that it's a very powerful tool that can help to predict and to control air pollution in urban environments, basically automatize the use of resources, and also with self-driving cars, for instance. So it can have a very positive impact in cities, keeping in mind that 800,000 people die per year in the European Union due to the air pollution and exposure to high levels of pollution. Then this really is a very, very prominent area to help from AI. More examples, we can also manage more efficiently natural resources. So AI can really help. However, in the next slide, we have as well one negative aspect of this, and it's the energy use of ICT technologies, including data centers, which currently is estimated by 1% of the total consumption worldwide, but by 2030, it might reach 20%. So of course, one should really use this technology efficiently. If you know something about the data, you should embed that on your model. You should not allow your model to learn that information that you already should know. And if we move on to the next slides, I would like to quickly highlight a study that we have recently developed together with one of the speakers, Manuela Battaglini. She will talk about this in more detail. It's about digital contact tracing and the ethical and technological requirements to be able to have these smartphone apps and to really help us to fight the COVID-19 pandemic without compromising our freedoms and our privacy rights. So Manuela will talk about this in more detail later on. This is just accepted for publication. You can access the preprint as well. I would like to quickly also summarize the whole discussion. There are three main actors: technology, individuals, and government. All of that happens within the planetary boundaries of the environment. What we should really be aware of is that technology is really pushing very fast both individuals and governments. And the individuals need to be able to adapt to the new technology, and governments need to be able to regulate that very quick development of technology. However, and that's something that we will stress a lot in this talk, insight should come before oversight. So we should really understand what AI can and cannot do before regulating it. That's a very important point. And to conclude, I will just leave here my conclusions of our collaborative work. Essentially, AI is affecting everyone's lives now, and it will affect it more in the near future. This is a global dialogue that we need to have so that AI will drive us towards a prosperous future rather than a very negative future. And despite the very positive aspects and potentials associated with AI, we should work together and have a very open discussion in order to overcome the gaps in transparency, safety, and also ethical standards. I would like to thank you very much for your attention. We will have a Q&A after Max's presentation, but I think we can go, maybe Anna can introduce Max for the next talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ricardo and Francesco. It was an honor to co-write this paper with you. It is a unique and first of a kind systematic approach on how AI is affecting the SDGs. And I think the slide with the technical, individual, and government triangle also, in the second part of this event, we will actually discuss the role of organization and private sector to help achieve AI as a positive enabler of the SDGs. Now, I'm so thrilled and excited to introduce our next speaker, Max Tegmark, Professor of Physics and AI Center for Brains, Minds, and Machine at MIT. You were supposed to sit here in the studio with me, but unfortunately, you are not flying over to Stockholm to visit your family. You are staying put on the East Coast, so please, the virtual floor is yours, Max.
Thank you. Tack så mycket. It's a great honor and pleasure to be with you. Greetings from the Boston area here. So I'm going to be just sharing my screen here to start off. So there's, of course, huge growth and interest in artificial intelligence. And as you heard from Ricardo, we feel very conflicted about AI. And I think this is well summarized by America's most famous, actually, with technology, what can possibly go wrong? Well, you can forget to turn on the audio from the, so let me try again. Now you'll be able to hear America's most famous philosopher.
To alcohol, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems.
So you could hear him, right? So the reason I like this joke so much, to alcohol, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems, is that if you replace the word alcohol by artificial intelligence, it's still funny because, as Ricardo said, right, artificial intelligence is such a double-edged sword. It can both cause all these problems and solve all these problems. That's what our paper was about. That's what we're talking about here. So the key question, of course, is not, are you for AI or are you against it? Are you excited or are you scared? But rather, what can you do to make sure that we get the positives as much as possible and as little as possible about the negatives? This is what I'm going to focus on. So the reason we're having this conversation is, of course, because artificial intelligence is just getting more and more powerful. Think about it. Not long ago, robots couldn't walk. Now they can do backflips. Not long ago, we didn't have self-driving cars. Now we have self-flying rockets that can land themselves with artificial intelligence. Not long ago, AI could not do good face recognition. Now it can simulate your face, saying things you never said. Not long ago, artificial intelligence could not beat us at the famous Asian board game of Go. Then AI from Google DeepMind took 3,000 years of human Go wisdom and Go games, put it all in the trash, and became the world's best player just by playing against itself for a day. And the most interesting thing here, when it beat the best, is not that it beat the best players in Go and also in chess, but that it beat AI researchers like myself, who had spent decades optimizing and trying to program in the intelligence themselves, all made obsolete now. So this great progress in power of AI can, of course, solve so many problems and give all those upsides that Ricardo mentioned. We can save over 1 million lives on the world's roads soon by autonomous vehicles, I think, and even more by eliminating mistakes in healthcare, still more by improving diagnostics of prostate cancer, lung cancer, blindness, and so on. And still more lives, I think, can be saved by accelerating medical science itself. For example, the famous protein folding problem, where there's an annual contest that was recently won by an AI from Google DeepMind that just takes the genetic sequence of the AI, figures out how it folds up, and really great agreement with incredibly expensive X-ray crystallography. Stuff like this, I think, can really accelerate drug discovery and save a lot of lives. We can use it, of course, for improving education, to make it accessible and more customizable. We can also, though, like Ricardo said, use it to cause problems, because AI is really not good or evil. It's a tool, just like a knife or fire, which can be used for good things and for bad things. Some of the problems are caused by somebody deliberately using it to cause harm, like when Cambridge Analytica used AI to manipulate people.
They thought it was fireworks first, but it was a drone bomb, a brazen assassin.
Drone technology to try to assassinate people. And sometimes you even have just any random idiot like this guy who tried to drop a bomb on his ex-girlfriend. You know, it enables all sorts of malicious actors to do malicious things. But sometimes the problems are not caused by malice. Sometimes the problems are just caused instead by poor understanding and excessive trust in the technology. For example, the good folks at Knight Capital, they had not understood their AI-powered trading system well enough when they deployed it. That's why it managed to lose $440 million in less than an hour. Our friends at Boeing had not understood well enough how their very simple automated control system on the 737 MAX worked. It wasn't malice, right? It was over-trust. And even hacking, which we normally blame on malice, is actually caused by lack of understanding of how the complicated security systems work.
You see, I would never say these things, at least not in a public address, but someone else would. Someone like Jordan Peele.
So artificial intelligence is obviously going to give further tools to hackers and others who want to trick you and manipulate you, and it can also be used to fight against this. So what do we do to get these benefits without all these downsides? I have two messages. Two lessons I think we should draw from this here. The first one is we have to draw the line. We have to look at all the possible uses of artificial intelligence that are outlined so nicely in the paper, and then draw a clear red line between the ones that we feel are acceptable as a society and unacceptable. Many people say, oh, it's impossible to stop technology from being used for absolutely everything. Forget it, you're just a crazy dreamer. But no, actually, I have good news for you. Biologists have already succeeded in this fantastically well. Think about this. Biologists gathered together in the 70s and successfully drew a line and said it's acceptable to use biology to save people's lives, but not for biological weapons. That's why you never read about biological weapons today. And that's why when we ask people, we know what they think about biology, they generally think about it as a force for good in the world. We were on the verge of a horrible arms race in biological weapons in the 70s, but the biologists stepped up and put an end to that. They had a conference in the Silmar, California, where they further nuanced the line, and that's why biology is so successful today. This is the role model I think we should be inspired by when we talk about artificial intelligence, and that's why we organized one of our AI conferences in the same place, bringing together leading AI researchers and thinkers to discuss exactly where we want to draw the line for AI. This produced the 23 Silmar principles, and that have been signed by a who's who of AI researchers around the world. And there are now a lot of collections of principles from different sources in the world, really trying to draw that clear line. One example is very directly linked to the biology. Of course, AI, any technology can be used for new ways of helping people or harming people. It's not just AI or biology. And just like biologists and chemists wanted to use their technologies for good things, not for new weapons, AI researchers also, of course, want to use their technology for new solutions, not for new ways of murdering people. Now, this gets sort of trickier the longer we wait as the technology gets more powerful, because traditionally the strategy that we have used to get things right has been to just learn from mistakes. But we don't want to learn from mistakes when things get ever more powerful. And I'm going to skip a little bit here to leave time for discussion. It's pretty clear that artificial intelligence is going to continue getting ever more powerful. We can think of this landscape of tasks where the difficulty represents how hard it is for AI to do a task at human level, and the sea level as being what AI can do today. And many people think that eventually that sea level will rise so high that AI can do all tasks better than humans can. For a while, this was largely dismissed as just a bunch of philosophers who didn't know what they were talking about, but that's certainly not true today. So before I asked if superintelligence is possible at all, according to the laws of physics, now I'm asking, will it actually happen? Yes, no, or it's complicated?
A little bit complicated, but yes.
Yes, and if it doesn't, something terrible has happened to prevent it.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, probably.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
So that was obviously not just a bunch of philosophers. Google DeepMind's leader, Demis Hassabis, right, was one of the guys who just said yes there. There's a bunch of famous AI professors on that list. So we have to take seriously that maybe we will, perhaps in a matter of decades, get AI that can do pretty much all cognitive tasks that we humans can do. And this goes far beyond the level of technology we looked at in this original paper, but it's very relevant, I think, to have a little bit of foresight as we steer our course ahead. And this leads to a second lesson I think we need to learn right now, which is the collaboration we need to do the good rather than the bad with AI has to be driven by what drives really all collaboration, namely a shared positive vision. And this time, because AI knows no borders, it has to be a globally shared positive vision. It can't be something where only the US wins or only China wins. It has to be something that everybody in the world feels excited about, that yes, it's going to become better for us too. And the Sustainable Development Goals are, of course, exactly such a thing. There's a lot of sympathy both in China and in Europe and in the US and pretty much everywhere else at least among some politicians, for these sort of ideas. But there's at the same time a huge pessimism really sweeping our society. I don't know if you've seen this recent survey where more than half of the millennials in the world think that we're going to have a nuclear attack within the next 10 years. And in many parts of the world, most people think it was better 50 years ago, not only in South America and in large parts of Africa, but even in Italy, even in France, even in significant parts of the US. That's not good, right? So when people think to the future, do we want to just get paralyzed by fear of all the negatives? Yes, we should of course think about them so we can draw that line and avoid making the mistakes. But we have to also focus on the right side of the screen, the positives that we can have. Because it's thinking about how much we can all gain if we work together, which is going to make us work together. And I think Europe and Sweden can play a really key role here because we've done this before. We had the dark ages, it sucked pretty bad. And then there was this positive vision. Hey, let's have a renaissance. Let's have democracy. Let's have the scientific revolution and make these better for everybody. We had the industrial revolution. We could massively increase our production of food and other things we needed. We had the positive vision in the European Union of peace through interdependence. Europe still has a good part of the economic power in the world, but as American newspapers like to make fun of, we're really, the European Union is totally punching below its weight in world affairs, having very little influence on sharing its vision globally. And we've also dropped from first place to third place in AI. And we're proceeded this kind of week. And you know, when I read the European newspapers now, it's so much focused on fear rather than on positive visions, as you all know who are there. So I think in conclusion here, in my final minute, we should have a Renaissance 2.0 hit now and think really big about how we can create an even more inspiring future powered by artificial intelligence. So we've done huge European collaborations before, for example, in physics. Let's do another one centered on for example, an AI CERN for global health, where we commit to giving away all these awesome AI fruits to everybody. And most of all, let's think about what we did in Sweden after World War II. We had this very positive vision to try something that had really never been tried anywhere before, to use our growing economic power to give free healthcare for everybody, free education for everybody, free retirement plans for everybody. This was obviously dismissed by many people as just naive dreaming again, but Swedes are not only idealistic, right? We're also very practical, and we made this work. And we conquered the world, not in some kind of stupid, violent Viking way, but we conquered the world with this idea. And I think time is very ripe as we look at next steps to do the same based on this. Let's look even a little bit beyond the SDGs. We know AI is going to be able to help us achieve them faster if we avoid the problems, but let's not stop there. Let's ask, how can we go beyond? And if AI keeps growing without bound, as I think it will, we should be able to go quite far beyond all of the SDGs and really formulate a vision for the future that everybody around the world is incredibly excited about. And that is exactly what I think will make people collaborate to make this inspiring AI future a reality.
Thank you so much, Max. Do you want to end with your final slide?
This is my final slide.
Perfect. So thank you, music, to our ears here, as we do believe that that Sweden can take the leading role in AI sustainability. I'm glad to linger on this slide, because to draw the line between acceptable AI and unacceptable AI, which I think is crucial, there should or must be steps to help explainability models and secure more transparency in AI applications. So that is what I would encourage research and also a practical approach to that. Also, I want to comment on the EU guidelines for trustworthy AI, and I think with Ursula leading the ship, I think there will be somewhat unpredictably fast regulation on some areas that have been defined as high stakes. So looking forward to that development. So next slide, please. We are now in the panel discussion. I will moderate. I'm very happy to have a lot of questions from the audience. The first one is directed towards Francesco, Ricardo, myself, and others. It is a question on the research, and also Max, but I will let Francesco and Ricardo answer this one. And myself, is there a risk, this is the question from the audience, is there a risk that in the literature you reviewed, authors are overly positive about AI because they are AI researchers themselves, hence creating a bias in the analysis?
Yeah, maybe I can start with the answer, and then Francesco can complete it, and the other authors. Yes, that's something that we recognize in the study, and that we discuss it as well. It's one of the aspects that that probably gives a bit more generality to our conclusions. We did not talk about that very much today, although of course you can see it in the differences between the studies when you take into account the strength of the evidence, how in some cases there is a big gap or not. There is a bias towards positive results, it is true. And in many of these applications that we mentioned, there is the need for less controlled experiments. So to kind of deploy an application that works well in a laboratory setting to really see how it would work in a more dynamic environment. So yes, it's something to take into account when interpreting the results. And that was a big part also of our expert elicitation process.
Just a very quick addition. I think for further work, which would be really fun to do, there's an easy way to measure this bias by just comparing the answers from AI researchers in industry who are normally not allowed by their companies to talk about negative effects because it can be bad for business. Just like Google's employees are not allowed to talk about how what Google is doing might be bad, and compare that with AI researchers in academia who are normally free to speak very openly.
Maybe following up to that, I guess it's also true that even in machine learning conferences, there is almost an obsession for beating the state of the art, and only results that are better than the state of the art get published. And perhaps there should be a more open view for studies that also report the failures, the methods that don't work so well, or to highlight the limitations. And that's maybe not currently in the community's mindset, but of course that would be important. Absolutely.
And well, if I may jump in, is another interesting outcome of this study is looking and understanding as experts as expert authors, understanding where the gaps are. So it's interesting to see where we found all the evidence, but sometimes it's even more interesting where we kind of felt something is there, but there was no study there. And some of these were, of course, some negative impacts that were under-researched, but also the geographical differences of the applications of AI. Obviously, we have more and more publications and insights in countries where there is a strong AI research. So sometimes some less wealthy nations could be affected by this lack of research that is applied to that context.
Perfect. That leads me into the next question, which is to Max. And it is a question that will, in a theoretical way, lead to the next question. So it goes, which of the SDGs have the highest multiple effect for developed countries, and which ones for the developing countries? I will hand that over to Max, but it's related to the question, what are the next steps for this research?
Can you clarify, did you say multiplier effects? Or are you saying basically which SDGs should the developing ones focus most on, and which ones should the developed focus most on? Or?
So which has the highest multiplier effect for developing countries? If they were to choose to apply AI, in what SDGs would that have the most multiplier effect? And what about the developing countries?
I think we want to follow the needs. So in developing countries, for example, using machine learning to give more access to good education, especially to women in underserved areas, huge impact, right? Similarly, if you look at areas of better to improve food production, provision of better healthcare, using machine learning so that people out in small villages can get access to the sort of high quality diagnosis that previously was only available in their capitals, very high impact. If you look at the developed nations, then I think, frankly, number 16 is incredibly important. Right now, the worst thing that AI researchers have been warning about for so long is exactly what's happening. We're seeing a relatively harmonious and peaceful world getting incredibly polarized. Like when I read Swedish newspapers right now, there's always articles about how terrible things are in China, and maybe things are getting suddenly worse in China, or maybe there's a sustained campaign from powerful groups trying to start a new Cold War. I think the last thing we need in the developed nations is another Cold War. I think it's just exactly the opposite of this shared positive vision we need to have, because as I said, so when you're dealing with really positive technology, you can't be stuck in an old Cold War mindset that one side is going to win and one is going to lose. Either, this technology can make everybody dramatically more wealthy, as long as we respect each other's countries and don't have stupid conflicts. So I think we need to be very careful with AI used to manipulate us, in particular, into unnecessary conflicts that are really not in our interest.
Thank you, Max. So there's a lot of questions coming in, and the next one I will answer, since I've had experience from the policy and governmental side. It's what type of reaction have you had from policymaker after publishing this research? And also, I want to answer, can AI act as a differentiator for startup business? Well, first of all, I've been an advisor to the Minister of Digitalization at the Swedish government, and we were talking about AI sustainability. Hence, what we're doing is we're creating insights for policymakers, regulators, politicians to truly understand and demystify AI. At the moment, there's too much verticals. So we need to explain AI, but we also need to increase research topics and its effect on society. So we will give the opportunity for policymakers and politicians to actually understand and do adequate actions and regulation accordingly. When it comes to AI as a differentiator for startup business, well, that is a very key starting point in the AI Sustainability Center, working with startups to have them scale in a responsible manner so they don't end up in the Facebook or Amazon pitfalls when it comes to discrimination, privacy intrusion, unethical nudging, and social exclusion. So it is a competitive edge to, from the beginning, as a scalable business, incorporate in the business model the ability for transparency, explainability, and accountability. Please, Max or Francesco and Ricardo, if you want to comment on one of these questions, the startups' role of AI sustainability and also the policymakers. Have you, Max, received any comments from policymakers after publishing this research?
Oh, yes, very many. I mean, there's an enormous interest, and they're all asking the same question, what should we do? And they're getting all these different answers from all sorts of people. So they're very confused.
Yeah, so indeed, that is a very important and crucial next step for the research community to study in a multidisciplinary way, in a continued multidisciplinary ways to give the best insights for policies.
You know, and something interesting from these kind of studies is that, as Max said, this is complicated and everything is connected with everything. But I mean, this is a starting point to kind of map the space and understand which areas would be more interesting to focus on. And then obviously at the policy level, or let's say, for instance, as a city level or so on, one can decide priorities and then really go into the applications. And well, as researchers, we really have, let's say, a duty to try not to only publish our paper and wash our hands with the study, but really try to get this into impact and really also help understanding what all of this means, actually, which is not trivial. Yeah,
the advice I give when policymakers ask me questions is, first of all, go listen to the AI researchers. And second, don't listen too much. When I say listen to them, I mean there is already a great deal of thought about what should actually be done that the politicians just aren't aware of, and work like what you've been describing as an example. So it's fantastic that they're listening to you, Anna. Very, very happy. At the same time, they should not listen too much to what Google and Facebook and certain other very powerful influence companies say, because of course they are always trying to lobby the government to do what they want. For example, the European Union recently is not put out a white paper for a GDPR for artificial intelligence to exactly try to draw that line that I think we need to draw. And sure enough, Google came back with a big lobbying piece in response saying, oh, no, we don't need any line. You know, we don't need any regulation, really. Just trust us. That's the sort of feedback I think the policymakers are better off not listening to.
Indeed, Max, it's like the French farmers lobbying for regulation in the farming industry. Exactly. So the next question is to me and Max: can AI increase employment opportunities, or will automation lead to more unemployment? Let me just a really quick comment on that, and then you can go ahead, Max. I think the more we learn about what AI can do or cannot do, we learn also about the capabilities of humans, such as intuition, creativity, and empathy. So I think there will be a lot of complementary skills to automation and AI. So this transformation on the labor market when it comes to reskilling and education should adapt to the jobs that would be lost, the jobs that would be partially lost and need complementary assistance by AI, or where it's the other way around, where humans and our true skills, human skills, will need some help from AI's complementary, and there will also be a need for more human meetings and physical contacts and creativity that will not involve any AI. Please, Max, comment on the question and also my remarks. Thanks.
So this is one of the most important questions. Will artificial intelligence naturally create ever more income inequality? And if so, how can we prevent that and make sure that the future becomes better for everybody? My view is that artificial intelligence, if you don't change anything else about society, it naturally increases income inequality, because whenever you replace some human workers by machines, the money that used to go to ordinary workers who had pretty modest incomes right now instead goes to those who own the machines, basically to the capital. Professor Erik Brynjolfsson has written some very convincing papers about this. So that the growing income inequality that we're seeing now in the United States and in many parts of Western Europe, you know, which has given us all this anger and given us Donald Trump and Brexit and so on, I think in large part is caused by technology. And the solution is not to stop technology. The solution is what we've always done in Sweden, to say, okay, as long as we collect enough money in taxes from all these successful business, then we can use that money to take care of people and give people the resources they need. So we shouldn't think of us as always having to compete with the machines, because eventually we won't be able to, but rather we should make sure that we really have this
security net,
this social safety net 3.0, where we provide for people. Maybe it's basic income. I'm not such a big fan of that. I think it's better that the government hires more teachers and hires more nurses and the sort of jobs that people enjoy having.
Yeah, this discussion is extremely interesting, but I have to break now, and we will have a 5-minute break, and hope to see you very soon again. Thank you, Max. Thank you, Francesco and Ricardo. I'll see you in 5 minutes.
Thank you. Tack.
Thank you.
So welcome back, everyone. This is part 2, AI sustainability in practice. At this part of the event, we will have a presentation by 3 prominent speakers, and the first one being Elaine Grunewald. She's the founder of the AI Sustainability Center. She's gonna talk about the societal and ethical consideration when applying the SDGs to AI. She has had experience from this and actually was pioneering, innovating the term tech for good as head of sustainability at Ericsson. And she is author of the forthcoming book, Sustainability Leadership, a Swedish approach to changing your company, your industry, and the world. Please, Elaine, enter the virtual stage.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Hoping that my slides will be up any moment now. And just as a bit of background, I was really fascinated by the preceding discussion where there were a lot of questions around policy and how do we deal with these types of questions. And so in my talk, which is kicking off this session and we'll end with a panel as we did in the first one, I wanted to start by zooming out a bit and coming into some of these different policy questions. And my background with the SDGs has been quite long, but back already, I remember working with ICT for development already in the time of the Millennium Development Goals. And then as that process shifted over to the SDGs, yeah, there were a lot of developments that took place, but I think what is really interesting is how the concept of ICT for development has evolved. So going back in time and still today, it was about digital plus sustainability, and then the equation was leading to something that was always seen as positive. It was about growth of the industry, but also growth of access, bringing on billions of new subscribers into the mobile world and enabling access to everyone. There were deep concerns about the digital divide at the time, and there were a number of papers that were written. I don't know if we could go to the next slide. Some of the work and the papers that were highlighted, in particular by one group that I've been part of, is called the Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development. And so here we were looking, over the years about what role technology could play, not just in enabling the goals, but really creating technology as an accelerator of the goals. And more recently, there was a high-level panel on digital cooperation that was established for the Sustainable Development Goals. That was chaired by Melinda Gates and Jack Ma. And a report was submitted in June of 2019. And there were a number of recommendations that were included in that report, looking at things like the inclusive digital economy. And I know in December of 2019, that was when the world had this like 50-50 moment where there was just as many people connected to the internet as not. So that was kind of a big aha moment. But despite that progress, and by the end of 2019, there was still 87% of people in developed world accessing the internet, but only 19% in less developed countries, which meant there's still some 3.6 billion without access. So while there was a lot of progress, a lot of optimism about technology and the SDGs, now we're coming into the next wave of this. So I think my point about this high-level panel and the UN Secretary General and the new roadmap that has come out, there is a growing recognition about the role of technology. And then I'm going to give the big but, and then we could go to the next slide. But when we come into the AI conversation, why is AI different? And I think Max hit on a lot of these points about weaponizing technology and things like that. I've been a big proponent of technology for good, but AI is different because it's self-scaling, it's self-learning, and it's self-propagating. So as the technology becomes more and more advanced, there is still insufficient, governance, transparency, explainability, accountability that needs to be addressed. And if we go to the next slide, we like to say at the AI Sustainability Center, there's of course these exponential benefits, but there's also exponential risks. And we're creating a new type of digital pollution in the form of privacy intrusion, discrimination, biases. And it's not really tech's fault, technology is neutral. It's more how you apply it. And I always believed very much in the intention. If your intention is good and you have a stated intention to drive technology as a force for good, you also have a responsibility to make sure that the technology is not misused in any way, and so on. So we could go to the next slide. So what's happening when you don't have that intention and you're not putting safeguards into place, there are some risks that can lead to quite severe consequences. So we run the risk of amplifying discriminations and inequalities. We run the risk of drawing conclusions. Maybe you're using data that's not mature enough, or your AI model's not mature, and you end up with faulty conclusions or predictions. There's also a whole issue here around capitalization on dopamine and other forms of vulnerabilities. And all of this can lead to social exclusion and some pretty severe violations of trust. So next slide, please. If we look at what's really behind this and what's causing this, we think there are 4 different types of pitfalls. Can just click through here. One is about immature data in AI, if your model and your data is mature enough. The other one comes back to what I said before about the intention. So this is like potential misuse or overuse of data. You have 2 types of biases. You have bias of the creator, where the programmer is intentionally or unintentionally programming their own values into the codes and the algorithms, and you have data bias that can lead to some of those risks as well. So in thinking about societal and ethical impacts of technology, we can go to the next slide, we believe that a new type of lens is needed. And this lens is not to look at technology for technology's sake, but to combine that lens with a legal lens and a societal lens. And this means that we're looking at the impact of technology on people and society, and thinking, what is that outcome? And that's really what the first paper that was highlighted in the first session really started to do. But of course, much more research and attention is needed to this to really start to understand on a deeper level the impact that we're having on people and society. So this lens, we call it the AI sustainability lens. It's bringing in a new part of a business model actually to address the ethics and the societal dimensions. Could go to the next slide. In the AI Sustainability Center, we've operationalized this into a framework where you can measure those effects on people in society and try to get an idea on some of those pitfalls and risks that I just, so briefly touched on. You can see, how am I performing if I start to put society on the same level as I put shareholders and customers and other types of stakeholders? So, just to give you a flavor of that, we're going to come back to these issues in the panel. And I could just go to the last slide now to say, so today we do have the Sustainable Development Goals as this guiding framework. And again, digital is a core enabler of the goals. But we also have some new and unforeseen events that are, happening around us today. We have COVID-19. I don't know if we've ever seen a situation where connectivity was more vital, to the whole functioning of society, whether that's education or work or even events like this. The world has gone even more virtual than it was already going. But also we have other events, Black Lives Matter, where we see different types of injustices, and we need to make sure that we drive technology as a powerful force for good and not let discrimination or biases become even more amplified. And of course, we have a current economic and job loss situation that is pretty much unprecedented. So I think the question is really, as Max said earlier, it's not for or against technology, but it's really how do we maximize the positive and minimize the negative. So I'm going to stop there, and Anna will introduce the next speaker, but I'll be back for the panel at the end of this session.
So thank you very much, Elaine, for your presentation. We're stepping over to the next speaker, who is Manuela Battaglini. She is the CEO of Transparent Internet, and you will talk about what we highlighted is so important to draw the line between acceptable and unacceptable AI, that is transparency in automated decision-making processes and personal profiling. We're extremely excited to have you on the virtual stage.
Thank you. So I'm going to share the screen. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about transparency, automated decision-making processes, and personal profiling. So the first thing that we have to talk about is about the main legal and ethical issues that are involved in automated decision-making and personal profiling. We're talking about discrimination, biases, and lack of transparency, but there are issues with transparency, with access, in the sense that individuals cannot access to the profiles that they are personal data, their personal data. And in last instance, our autonomy, dignity, and freedom are in risk. So now I'm going to show you some cases of these predictions or automated decision-making that we all know, but in many cases, what is called AI, it is not AI. So the results, more than be biased result, sometimes is a fraud. So in these cases, for example, assessing personality and job suitability from a 30-second video where a candidate explaining himself, who he is, an algorithm has to assess if he is the right person to be hired. And if he's not hired, he's not only not recruited, but he can be also out of the labor market. Or insurance company that they are taking information from social networks, from users' social networks to calculate the cost. But we all know that data from social networks, they are very low quality data, so they are not representative of people that they are assessing. Or Amazon, for example, in this case, Alexa can predict health status for the voice or the cough, so advertisement depending on the disease that this assistant predicts coming to the user. Or Facebook can predict when we are going to die. So Of course, they are taking all decisions from these predictions that they are not accurate and they don't represent us. We cannot access to this information. But let's go forward and how are decisions, how are these automated decision-making and personal profiling, they are regulated on GDPR. And if there is a right of explanation, that is even more important question. So this diagram, it was designed by Dr. Steen Rasmussen, my professional partner, and myself in a paper that we wrote together that is called Transparency, Automated Decision-Making Processes and Personal Profiling. We published it in 2019. And what is here explained is the personal data journey for until the social impact of inferences or personal profiling. So the point number one explains the individual needs. And this is very important because depending on the sector or the area the organization belongs, every user has a different need. And many times when we read these AI ethics documents, they start by the data collection and they forget about the user needs. So this is very important. The second point is data collection, that in our opinion, it is the most important stage because depending on all the personal data that they are collecting from user, they can make some predictions. So all attention, I mean, a lot of attention has to be made in this stage. So GDPR says that in Article 13.15 that these are the Carta Magna of Transparency in GDPR, right to be notified and right to access to our information, that before data processing, we have the right to be notified. This is a duty from organization. What are you going to do with my information in the whole data journey? And right to access, I have the right to access to my information. But the question is, I have to be the right to be notified the database, I mean, the information that is about myself in the databases, and the information that is made about myself in the inferences too. And the same with the right to access. Can I access to my information, I mean, to my profile, or only to the databases? Unfortunately, we can only access to the information that until stage number 3 in the databases. Why? Well, for many reasons, but the main reason is that Trade Secret Directive, intellectual property rights, and proprietary software allows companies to be opaque. So from the point number 4, that is automated decision-making and training set, number 5, profiling and inferences, and number 6, that is impact in individuals or group of individuals, being transparent is an ethical decision of the company. So we can see here the principles of GDPR, data minimization principle, transparency, fairness, and lawfulness principle, purpose limitation, informed consent, integrity and confidentiality, accuracy principle, and storage limitation principle. So we can see that the GDPR has very good intentions at the time of regulating inferences and personal profiling, but only its principles arrive until point number 3. So what we have to do, taking into account our diagram, we have designed how you have to design, or at least the main points that have to take into account at the time of design an ethical framework. Every point that you can see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, belongs to our stage, to every stage that is drawn in this diagram. And we have divided in ethics of data collection and communication, ethics of data processing, ethics of algorithms, and ethics of practices. So this is digital ethics at the end of the day. So first of all, we have to assess our surveillance system or technology. Through our technology, we surveil final users. What about the transparency and awareness about the different personal data that we collect from users? Failure or not in data minimization principle, that it was one of the most important principles in GDPR in order to data protection by design. Unilaterally alter terms of services and privacy policies, lack of control over personal data because we cannot opt in or opt out easily. So companies, organizations are collecting all kinds of data without our permission or whatever the legal basis is, it is active in that moment. Ethics of data processing, it is very important about the re-identification of individuals and all the means that are the companies have to re-identify individuals. Identification of types of individual in a sense that discrimination because of age, race, sexism, etc. Low and poor data quality, and I have to say that accuracy principle only in GDPR doesn't talk about data quality. It talks like in databases, our name is our name, our street is our street, but not a data quality itself. Security protocols, as pseudonymization, we have in Article 25, but anonymization and encryption and storing personal data. Be careful with repurpose and reasons. So if we are going to use this data for repurpose and reasons or goals, or it has to be proportional. It has to be condition with the other purpose. Ethics of algorithms, opacity in a sense that when not known how patterns are made, because of what we explained before, there are some norms that allow companies to be opaque. Discrimination and biases, no access to profiles for the same reason that it was explained before, and auditability of algorithms. And now I'm going to explain naming the paper that I wrote with Ricardo and the other colleagues and co-authors. What does it mean in the COVID-19 applications? And ethics of practices, that is unsolved, informed, and explicit consent, misuse of personal data, identity theft, privacy invasion due to technology use, impact on individuals that we have explained in this diagram, and transparency that is not solved either. So transparency, what information should we make transparent and to whom should it be disclosed? So now talking about the application of the COVID-19, this is an ethical, data ethics perfect case, because this application has to be developed by the basis, at least, of this ethical framework. And this is what we did in our paper. But I would like to say something very important before talking our paper. And the conclusion that we arrived at is that we need to reach a balance developing these kind of applications between the global equilibrium. We're talking about the governments that they need to control the pandemic and they need this epidemiological data, and the local equilibrium. We're talking about citizens, that citizens need to feel safety in all scenarios of their lives, family, leisure, social life, work, and not being discriminated because of this. So we have to take into account that both want the same goal, but they have different interests. So this is our paper, a social technical framework for digital contact tracing, that was written by Virginia Dignum, Ricardo Vinuesa, and Andreas Teodoro. And what we did is to divide in 3 different big groups this ethical and social technical framework: impact on citizens, technology, and governance. So, and we made these diagrams, spider diagrams, making a comparison with our 19 criteria of a Stop Corona, that is Austrian application, NHS COVID-19, that it was the former COVID-19 application, so now it's not active anymore, Trace Together from Singapore, and the guidelines from the European Data Protection Board. So just to mention the 19 criteria, the first one is respecting fundamental rights of individuals. That is, of course, is something basic and very important. Privacy and data protection, the main thing is publishing a data protection impact assessment. Transparency rights, notification, and access, as I mentioned before. Avoid discrimination, so the app needs to prevent stigmatization. So it has not to be used to discriminate people. Accessibility, possibility to be used by all, regardless of demographics, language, disability, digital literacy, and financial accessibility. And education and tutorials, inside the application, outside applications, all formats, to help people understand how it works. Technology, decentralized protocol, interoperability, Bluetooth, data management, ensure data minimization principle, and data protection by design, as I mentioned before too. Security, all the security measures, that these are one of the most important criteria of our paper. The application has to be easy to deactivate and remove. Open source code, so it's transparency, and of course what it makes at the end of the day is that people, citizens, trust the country, the government, and of course the application. In governance, ownership by state, data governance should be made public. Downloading the app needs to be voluntary. It has to have a sunset clause, clear, broader legal framework voted through Parliament, in a sense that the application itself cannot do the whole ethical work. So the government, through laws, has to approve some regulation or laws saying how the application has to be used in order to avoid discrimination, as we said before. Incidental findings and dual-use policy purposes beyond contact tracing, design, impact assessment, and open development processes, and right to contest and liability. So we put this point number 15, 17, and 19 in blue, because these are the 3 points that it is in governance group that the applications and the EDP, European Data Protection Board guidelines, didn't take into account. So we realized that it was really important, and coincidentally it's in governance group. So this is our paper, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Manuela. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation, and congratulations on your work. COVID-19 is accelerating the need for AI ethics, and I think there is a fast tracking worldwide on integrating or implementing digitalization and AI application. A lot of public sector has cost cutting demands and efficiency gains. They should be cautious on applying AI applications without this kind of transparency. So thank you so much, and we will get to the next speaker. Digitability at the indicator level of SDGs. Dr. Shivam Gupta, you are a PhD in geoinformatics researchers. You are a researcher at University at Bonn. So please enter the virtual stage, Shivam.
Okay. So thanks for the kind introduction, inviting me. So my name is Shivam Gupta, and I work at the Bonn Alliance for Sustainability Research in University of Bonn. This alliance is a partnership between the policy think tanks, academia, research centers, and applied science institutes. And we are actually focusing on a lot of parts which we have discussed during the whole session. And more specifically, we are focusing on how can digitalization and artificial intelligence can help in supporting SDGs at the indicator level. So the term digitainable basically stands for digital for sustainable. And that's how this whole term came into existence from the director of the institute, Professor Dr. Jakob Riener. Quickly, I'll just go through the background, and then I'll talk about digitalization AI, and then AI for SDGs, because that's what we are talking today in this whole session. The complexities and why we are focusing at the Bonn Alliance for Sustainable AI and Digitainability. So why sustainable development? The complexity of the global change we need to consider when talking about sustainable development. In which environment are we approaching sustainability is very important to be considered. So the need for sustainable development within the global changes are very important. So the global challenges we are facing is failure to the climate change mitigation, more extreme weather events, damage to the ecosystem we have seen in Brazil and in Australia. This year, threat to the global supply chains, example, COVID we are suffering right now, increasing inequality in and between society, and threatened multilateralism, as we discussed briefly in the first session. I have put in digitalization because it is as much as a challenge as in progress done. But on the other side, positive note, the global progresses we have made is decrease some negative factors such as extreme poverty, hunger worldwide, child mortality have decreased. Food security was decreased, but after COVID, I guess we're going to see a new image. Access to internet have increased, access to water and immunity have increased. Now, we need to consider these all aspects when talking about sustainable development. And that's what at the Bonn Alliance we are doing. We are looking into 3 important factors, which are important, taking into account the global changes, which are technological transformation, change orders, and the guiding principles in transitions. And how we are addressing this is in the form of 3 priorities, research priorities, which whole of the alliance, the 7 partners came together and decided, which is digitalization and artificial intelligence, mobility and migration, bioeconomy. So these are the focus at the Bonn Alliance we are working on. Now, I'll just not waste time in explaining everything, but more specifically focus on the topic which we are working on. But before that, I'll just say that we are not the ones who are focusing on just these 3 topics. We are actually looking at the cross section than on the specific topics. So if you see this triangle, we are more focused on the edge than on the corners. And that is what the beauty of this alliance is. So now moving towards the digitalization and artificial side, which is the focus of our discussion today. Before I start this, I just want to make this clear that why we are using digitalization and AI, since the discussion is on AI, because AI relies heavily on digitalization. And that is where it is important that we consider digitalization as one of the precursors for AI and vice versa sometimes. So now let's focus specifically on digitalizability of the SDGs. And as one of the speakers here said in his book, The Intelligence is About Achieving the Goals, in the chapter on friendly AI, I will just bring through the indicators that we have to face. And it's already discussed in the first session that we have 232 indicators and 169 targets to achieve. However, this is more complicated than it looks like. There are a lot of domains which are involved in talking about SDGs, and there's a lot of AI and digital applications which are involved. Now, as much as it looks complicated, it is also the beautiful opportunity for all of us to figure out the best way and to identify the acceptable and unacceptable ways, as discussed in the sessions, which we want to focus and make the use of technology in a very efficient and in conscious ways. The complexity which exists in terms of interlinkages, you can see on the right-hand side that here, this interlinkages are for the SDG goal 2 and the indicators. So basically it's a target level mapping. The red ones are the negative interlinkages and the black ones are the positive or kind of, yeah, and going in a synergistic way. So these are the things which we need to discover when we talk about use of technology at the indicator level and how it acts as a multiplier to the other SDG and the targets and indicators. Interlinkages could be in the form of synergies, trade-offs, and social practices. And this could be level of support required for these technologies to be realized at a sustainable goal level or the indicator level. Resources availability, because we can start to have the innovation, but at one point of the resource and then we just lose trust. I mean, in one of the discussions with one of my colleagues, we got to realize that in developing countries, people are tired of the word innovation or technologies because they got something which doesn't work out at some point in time and they have to just get used to new ones. I mean, just abruptly. And that's where the most important thing, if I summarize this slide, is to figure out how and to what degree is AI and digitalization relevant for the indicator level. And we need to answer these questions before using the technologies and make the conscious choices about it. And we need transdisciplinary perspective and discussion at the indicator level to identify the actionable and well-aware applications of AI and digital technologies. And why am I focusing on the indicator level is because there's a lot of interdependencies. At a goal level, we can go broad. We talk about a lot of domain, a lot of technology, but once we come to the indicator, there's an official definition. And based on that definition, we can see what is the context and what is technology giving to, so that we can see the trade-offs and the advantages. For example, in the low-income countries and the middle-income countries, there's a weak statistical capacity, so they cannot provide data. So is it like that we focus on indicator level interdependence once we have information about indicator 17.18.2 or 17.18.3. So we need to be aware about these very micro but important information. For example, the recent study of 2020 published says that we cannot look at indicator 9.4.1 individually. We need to look from the 9.2.1 also, and there is interdependency. We can't see it individually. There are more important questions to be answered before we talk about using technology, because, for example, there are resource availability contexts. We can talk about AI can solving health problems, but in the countries when there's an energy crisis, can we really use technologies at that level? And that need to be answered before we push these new technologies and do a hell lot of work on those lines. There's a national priority which we need to see and align our goals to the technology goals. A geographical context plays an important role. And this is what another point which we realized and also published recently, that it's not always that we need to see the synergies. We also need to look at the conflicts at the indicator level, because some of the conflicts help us achieve a lot of other integrations which are long-standing issues. So in that context, it is very useful to not only look for the positive side, but also look at the negative side, which could pay off, and hence we need to know this information. So looking into this, we have some, let's say, discussions on sustainable AI, and that's the AI part of Digitainable focuses on. We are inspired by the Asilmore AI principles, and where we put in the 4 focuses where we want to promote participation and to curb the technology over optimism. And I'm going to talk about over optimism in the next few slides, and to actually rationally and consciously use AI applications, so beneficial intelligence for SDGs at the indicator level. We need to consider both technical infrastructure and the social context. In some countries, even though you give technology, they are not adopting it. We need to be aware. I mean, as in the last presentation was said, that we need to respect the dignity and the acceptance level of the other people. Now, other contexts are the conscious understanding of the advantages and disadvantages of AI, and for the particular indicator, not going subjective, but based on the indicator definition, what are the advantages, disadvantages, and the multiplier effect it is producing. And we need to have these answers before we go high on AI users. And last but not the least is to need to access the potential long-term threats. We can also do scenario building, but also can realize, but of course, the limitation, we will assume these all things from the present situation about the future threats, but we need to be aware of about these for sustainable developments. So when I talked about AI optimism or the technology optimism, so this is one of the work we have done. So we have conducted a Digitainable Thinkathon, where we asked the experts from policy side, from academia, from industry, from all ways of communities to answer the questions about where do they see AI playing role for the indicators of climate change. And then there was a lot of green signals, which says that they find it positively relevant. However, if we go to the paper which is discussed at the first place in the first presentation today, we see a different picture. So there is a optimism in that context. However, once we came into discussion using the same image, what I'm showing you right now, and we started a discussion between multiple stakeholders, we got a very different picture. So you see the red dots where there was a lot of questions about how can we use it. And that's how we found it's relevant that we need to bring a lot of stakeholders together to find the common grounds for using technology at a SDG indicator level. Now, so this is one of the lessons which we have learned during this event, and we have journal at Digitainable on the AI side have research priorities, which I would like to highlight here, is that we want to consider both technological and social aspects together, and to answer the questions like at what level is data-driven AI contributing to the particular target and indicators, and we need to answer this question levels inside the indicator. So there's a process in place and how AI is playing a role. We need to have some information in the context about it. Next, we want to address is how can the frameworks we develop, and we are developing some frameworks which can help in generating the information about opportunities and threats proposed by the AI and digital technologies. We also want to figure out how we can standardize the process of AI adoption. And the last but not least is how can AI capabilities be integrated into the framework of SDGs. And there's a lot of discussion going on point number 4, which I'll show you in the coming time. So quickly about the first point, I'll just like to highlight that we had a discussion where we engage a lot of people because the aim is to see at what level data-driven AI is playing a role. We brought a lot of practitioners and not only the literature, contrary to what this first paper is all about, where the evidences from the literature was taken. But here we brought in all the experts who's working on certain projects or worked on projects or developing some tools to come together and answer the question of, is AI helping at particular indicator level for SDG 13 and SDG 4? That's what we have worked on till now in our research. And this is where Digital Enable is trying to bring in the expertise and to answer these questions so that we can use the technology in a very relevant way for sustainable development. So this is the whole image you can see where we have all other technologies also there. So people who don't want to answer about AI can answer about other aspects which they have worked on. So we get the broader perspective. Now, the second part is how can we measure the frameworks that can help in accessing the AI generated in opportunities and threats. So I'm working on this causal pathways at indicator level. So this is for indicator 3.1.2, where I am figuring out different processes where technology is playing role. And this is the process which is very deep inside the indicator, and I'm identifying where AI is playing role. This process also helps us identify where other indicators are also overlapping. So the red ones you can see are the other indicators which come in place inside this process to answer the interlinkages and interdependencies. We can go more deep and we can see, so wherever you see the brain is the points where AI is playing a role, and hence AI is important in some context of this indicator. And that gives a very, let's say, concrete information of how AI is transforming and being useful in this context. This is the overall image which I have done as an analysis where AI and other technologies are playing a role for the target. I'm just showing target because all the indicators are impacted. So to make the representation easy, I have chosen the indicators target for the indicators and have connected the different targets along with it. So this is what we are doing at the Digital Enable, and we are open to collaboration for other things. This whole discussions help together in putting this new SDG 18, which has been discussed by Future Earth and other entities about ensuring digital age. And that's also the presentation from this session starting about digital technology serving the people and the planet. So yes, that's what we are working on, and we are trying to identify the proper use of AI, find the benefit and the no benefit line so that we can use the technology successfully and an efficient way for the future.
Great.
So thank you.
Thank you so much, Shivam. So now we'll move into the panel. It will be Manuela back up with us here, as well as Shivam. So we could have all the panelists hopefully on the same screen. Great. And Shivam, you just ended, and I was thinking while you were speaking that sometimes it's not always appreciated the level of detail that is needed to go into the indicators. And it can be seen very much on the nitty-gritty level, but it is so fundamental to the research, because if we don't know how to measure and what we're measuring, we can never really get to impact, and we can never really get to understanding how people are in society are affected. So I found that very fascinating, and probably need much more time to dig down into what you what you just presented. But maybe we could kick off with a question to you. I was wondering, in the SDG AI interaction, and how realistic is it at this point in time? Because now we're 5 years into the Sustainable Development Goals. We do have another 10 years to the 2030, but from a timing perspective, how are we going to get this all together? The digital part, the AI part, the indicators, what's really needed now to kind of galvanize what you're presenting?
Simply, I guess the timing could be addressed if we use technology properly. If we just go in a rush, then maybe we are not talking about sustainability here. That's the most important thing, because if we just keep using the tools and all the IoTs and ICTs and all data collection, and it's end up creating e-waste, it's not going to end up in a sustainable way. Then we have a new goal in the 2030 agenda, or that's in the 2050 agenda, which will be addressing those. But I guess the timing could be useful. For example, this SDG 18 is coming, we can propose new targets which talk about digital capacities. And once technology is in place, I guess we all are optimistic that technology can solve a lot of things at a faster pace than what we already have right now. So looking into that, yes, timing is, I guess we are talking 10 years we have time, but actually we have just 5 to 6 years. After that, we start talking about new agendas and new goals. But it basically depends on how better we can get information and how quickly we can make that action come in relation as a big picture. So I guess it ends up in a very good direction. We just ignore one part of not misusing the opportunities we have.
And I guess on top of that timing question comes things that don't care so much about time, like COVID. So Manuela, you talked a lot about the personal profiling, the privacy, all these kind of risks and issues. And I wonder, when you think about COVID and using even basic technologies like GPS, and how do you see at this point in time where we are today with COVID and thinking about transparency and automated decision making, and even just like on one of your slides, I think you had opt-in and opt-out. And as we go into this or continue in this COVID world, and we have massive data collectors like Amazon and Google, and is it even possible to opt in and opt out? And how do you see it from the COVID perspective?
From the COVID perspective, collecting, having access to the GPS of devices is not acceptable nowadays. So we are talking about and the paper that I wrote with Ricardo. Ricardo, if you want, you can come out too to talk about our paper and research. But what I mean is that these how's it called, applications, what they are doing is tracing devices, not tracing people. So this is something that we have to take into account. Is one of the most important messages. That's the reason why the access had to be to the Bluetooth, because what they have to trace is the devices, not the people. And second, if they have access to the GPS, they are going to have access to the location of users. Having location to users, they can identify users, and if you can identify users, then discrimination starts, and all kind of discrimination acts against people or geographical areas where there's more contagious rates. So it's totally unacceptable from ethical or digital ethics point of view.
Ricardo, did you want to add something there? You have popped into the panel.
Have been added to the panel. No, I think Manuela explained it very well. That was one of the keys, that through the use of Bluetooth, you shift to a local frame of reference, if you want to put it like that. So you don't know where the individual in contact is. You just know the respective contacts among individuals. And that helps us to fulfill many of the criteria with dual usage and with other malicious applications of the data that is being gathered with the app. So the use of the Bluetooth is really helping. I think that perhaps one interesting thing of our framework is that there will be future uses of similar apps for other applications, as we see that this can help in this particular case of the pandemic. It will set a precedent to use these apps in a large scale, and then to set the socio-technical requirements and the basically to put those barriers to protect our data and our privacy for this particular case can really help in future apps which could have similar
and I have to add that the Spanish government has our paper at the time of developing the COVID-19 application, Radar COVID, and some of the Latin American governments contact us in order to say, please explain us some of the points, big criteria, because we want to adapt our application to your paper, to your criteria.
Okay, and so most of the questions that came in on the chat were very COVID related. So Shivam, coming back to what you showed on the indicator level, and if you think about AI implementation and the social discussions around the SDGs, how do you see privacy for the SDGs, and how do you see these types of risks coming in relation to the indicators and the work that you have presented?
So most important thing here is not all indicators requires or has the intervention from the public, but those need proper considerations, and that's what we need to be very clear about. So if the technology, for example, if we are using mobile phones of the individuals, then we have to be careful on those ends. And if it is more about government data being analyzed using AI, then we can actually make it more independent from these all discussions, and at least further to some extent. And if there is a impact that things can, one indicator can impact other indicators and cause butterfly effect, then it is beautiful. So, but privacy is a major concern. That's why I said we need to consider both the technological aspect, but also the social aspect into it. Otherwise, we are not going to end up anywhere. AI needs data, and it requires public involvement as much as technological involvement in it.
Good. And I know there was another question about, well, there was a couple more questions I want to bring up. One was about what can organizations deploying AI solutions do in order to be more ethical? And I think this is something that really needs to move into the forefront of the business agenda as well as the government agenda. There's two tracks there, but from the business agenda, if you're in a big company and you're not thinking about these issues and thinking about how you can start to be proactive and mitigate these risks, I would say that I would predict that you're going to run into some serious issues going forward. And that just really highlights the need for frameworks to be able to measure digital impacts and digital risks in the same way that we have measured, many other risks that kind of dance around technology, whether that's cybersecurity or business continuity or any of the more classical business risks. So I think it's the question that was asked is just highlighting a really serious gap. And if you look at that from a policy point of view, we have always had this lag where technology is advancing at a faster pace than policy frameworks or regulatory frameworks are. And so as we're applying or thinking about technology as an enabler for the SDGs, we also need to find ways to close and reduce those gaps. We just have a couple more minutes left in the panel here. I don't know if Shivam and Manuela, if you want to make a couple of closing remarks. Otherwise, there's a question on carbon footprint we could go to, but I feel like that might be just a bit off topic, but happy to dive into that. Manuela, would you like to?
Thank you. I just wanted to say that this is a very important topic in a sense that ethics or digital ethics is going to impact on companies' culture. So it's very important, the culture of the companies at the time of apply or implement digital ethics is so important. If the company organization has not an ethical culture, it's not going to work. It's going to be only makeup, just to make a show outside, but in the inside it's going to be exactly the same. That is one of the biggest dangers in ethics nowadays. And second, in order to be transparent, this is an ethical decision. As I explained in my presentation, we have to take into account that laws allows companies to be opaque. But I think that governments have to approve one very important principle that is not approving any law, that is that the preponderance of fundamental rights. What does it mean? So when trade secret and IP are against fundamental rights, what laws cannot do is to protect companies' organizations' interest and not fundamental rights of citizens. So with this principle of preponderance of fundamental rights that we are working on it on the Spanish government, we want to save and to protect the fundamental rights of citizens instead of commercial interests that now.
Yeah, just an important comment on that. I mean, we have the UN guiding principles for business and human rights. And I think you're making a distinction there that's important because it is a state duty to protect, whereas it is a corporation's duty to respect human rights. So I think that's a really fundamental concept to have in. And I don't mean to cut you short, but we have literally 1 minute left. So I just want to give Shivam the last minute to add your closing comment. And then
I just want to second what Manuela just said, that especially after the COVID times, digital push is pretty high. And it is important that we consider these ethical considerations very carefully, then move toward digitalization, no matter if it's SDG goal at indicator level or just ethics, values for the business and for the future plans after COVID work. So yeah, I just want to second that and just want to end it there.
Okay. And I'd really like to thank the panel for participating here. I'm going to hand back over to Anna and I believe Francesco to wrap up the event for us. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine, for moderating the panel and your presentation as well. We're about to wrap up, and I will have some closing remarks with the help of Francesco. I do want to answer the questions whether the slides will be available, and yes, they will, and you will find them where well, we will inform you where you can find it. Well, I want to start with thanking the speakers, the audience, with all the questions and a very, I think, bold discussion on how to start preparing research community to provide policymakers with enough insights in order to protect human rights. We want to thank KTH for sponsoring or co-sponsoring this event with the AI Sustainability Center. And Francesco, please wrap it up.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, everyone. Yeah, just a couple of thoughts after this exciting couple of hours. So I think we heard pretty well that we're at a crossroad for the future of AI, where we have to try to focus on the positive, or as Max put it, acceptable parts of AI while limiting the risks, such inequalities and polarization. And research like the one we heard in this webinar should help guiding choices for an AI-fueled sustainable development. And not only stopping at the SDGs, as everybody pointed out, they are to be achieved in 10 years, but also trying to go, again, as Max said, well beyond the SDG with shared positive views. So basically, the future is wide open, and there are various actors here. From the research side, I think it's very interesting now that we're working, or many groups are working on the broad picture, also then going into the applications that are most important in trying to guide decisions in some of the key challenges of our times. And of course, the energy and climate change challenge is something that comes to mind, but now obviously also the COVID crisis. And it was also very interesting to hear from Shivam some applications going from not only the target level, but also at the indicator level, and then going more and more then at the applicative level. And then, of course, we heard some very interesting thoughts from Elaine and Manuela going really at the applicative side of what should be done, both on the legal side and the ethical decisions to be taken. So, well, once again, I think it was a very compressed couple of hours where I did learn a lot from all the speakers, and I'm really happy to have been part of this discussion.
Thank you. So what is very apparent is that we cannot continue to work in silos. So multidisciplinary research is vital, but also research that is applicable and has a bridge over to what policymakers and regulators should and shouldn't do. And also, as Elaine moderated and also presented in the panel, how organizations can, with right tools and framework, work for best practices to help regulators make us feel trust towards the society and organizations in this new data-driven AI era. So thank you all for being part of this event, and hope you have a great day, afternoon.
Thanks for inviting
me. Same to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.